All right, so picture this. You've got a popular governor, fresh off a run for vice president. His career is just skyrocketing, right? Seems unstoppable. And then, bam, in one day, it all just stops. Today, we're going to unpack the wild political storm that led to one of the most shocking decisions in modern American politics. So, let's mark the date, January 5th, 2026. This is the day the political world in Minnesota just got turned upside down. I mean, this was the sudden, shocking end to a campaign that pretty much everyone thought was a lock. And the question on everybody's lips was, wait, what just happened? Why? And the news, well, it broke fast. All the major outlets were confirming it. Governor Tim Walz, the guy who was just the Democratic nominee for VP, was suddenly ending his bid for a third term as governor. This sent absolute shockwaves, not just through Minnesota, but through the entire National Democratic Party. So that's the big mystery, isn't it? Why would a guy at the peak of his career, a popular governor, a recent VP candidate, why would he just walk away? Well, the answer isn't one simple thing. It's actually a whole series of crises that slam together to create what you can only call the perfect political storm. Okay, to really get why this was such a bombshell, you first have to understand who we're talking about. You have to look at the career that came before it all hit the fan. I mean, just look at this career path. It's a straight line pointing up. He gets elected to Congress. Then he's governor of Minnesota. He oversees this massive progressive legislative session, and then boom, he's the Democratic nominee for vice president. Every single move was a step up. And that's what makes the sudden, screeching halt in 2026 so jarring. So, where did the cracks start to show? Well, the most immediate reason given for him stepping down was a series of scandals that just kept getting bigger and bigger, putting his entire administration under a seriously intense national microscope. Okay, get a load of this number. $250 million. That's how much was stolen in a massive fraud scheme. There was this nonprofit, Feeding Our Future, that basically siphoned away money that was supposed to pay for kids' meals during the pandemic. The size of this theft was just staggering, and it immediately raised huge questions about the state's oversight. You could say this was really the first major crack in the armor for the Walz administration. But then, it got worse. A lot worse. A viral video pops up from a right-wing influencer, a guy named Nick Shirley, claiming there's another huge fraud scheme, this time in the state's daycare system. Well, that video blew up. It triggered a whole new FBI investigation, and this is key, it got the attention of the White House. The Trump administration stepped in and froze all federal child care payments to Minnesota. The pressure was suddenly dialed up to 11. And of course, Republicans in the state legislature immediately started calling for Governor Walz to resign. So you can see the narrative starting to build, right? His political opponents, like that influencer who posted the video, were successfully painting these scandals as a direct failure of the governor's leadership. And they were not shy about taking a victory lap, let me tell you. And just like that, the attacks went from the State House straight to the White House. President Trump himself jumped on social media to blast out the story, directly accusing Walz. He even claimed, with no evidence, that the fraud was in the tens of billions. At that point, this wasn't just a state scandal anymore. It had officially become a national political weapon, and it was aimed squarely at Governor Walz. But here's the thing, to really, truly understand the kind of pressure Walz was under, we actually have to hit rewind and go back a few months before all these scandals really exploded. Because before the political firestorm, there was this incredibly profound tragedy, both for him personally and through the whole state, that really set the stage for everything that came next. Yeah, June 14th, 2025. This was a day of just unbelievable violence and loss for the entire political community in Minnesota. It was an event that truly shook the state to its very core. Listen to how this unfolded, because it's just terrifying. First, a state senator and his wife are shot and wounded in their own home. Then, just an hour and a half later, the Speaker Emerita of the House, Melissa Hortman, and her husband are assassinated in their home. The suspect was finally caught after this huge 40-hour manhunt, and they found he had a hit list with other public officials on it. Make no mistake, this was a direct, targeted attack. And for Governor Walz, you have to understand, this wasn't just some abstract political crisis. This wasn't just an attack on the government. Melissa Hortman was one of his dearest friends. So on top of everything else, he was dealing with this deep, devastating personal loss, all while trying to lead a state that was in shock and grieving. And you'd think a tragedy like that might bring people together, right?
Well, instead, it was almost immediately dragged into a nasty partisan political fight, a fight that was being fueled by a storm of online disinformation. And you can see just how divided things were, even inside the Republican Party. As these baseless conspiracy theories about the assassination started flying around online, you had some people, like Republican Senator Julia Coleman, who were pleading for unity, saying, hey, let's stop with the baseless theories. But then you had others, like Representative Walter Hudson, who basically said, nope, I'm not condemning anything, I'm not playing this stupid game. That split tells you everything you need to know about how toxic the political environment had really become.
So, how does this all come together and lead to him quitting? Well, you have the grief and trauma from the summer, you have this incredibly divisive political atmosphere, and then you have the escalating fraud scandal. All of these things started to collide.
And in the end, Governor Walz himself basically pointed to the weight of it all. He called it an extraordinarily difficult year for the state. And you can see why. The pressure was just immense. It became impossible for him to do two incredibly demanding jobs at the same time: govern the state through all these crises and also run a tough re-election campaign.
So, if you break it all down, it wasn't just one thing that led to his withdrawal. It was the convergence of four huge crises. First, you have the unspeakable tragedy of the assassination, which created this foundation of trauma. Then, you have the weaponized disinformation that just poisoned the political air. On top of that, you get a massive government scandal that gave his opponents all the ammunition they needed. And finally, the intense pressure from the federal government just made the whole situation impossible to manage. It was, in every sense of the word, a perfect storm. And that really leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? I mean, sure, the collapse of the Walz campaign is a story about one politician in one state, but it's also a chilling case study of how personal tragedy, weaponized lies, and political scandal can all merge to create a level of pressure that's almost unbearable. It really makes you wonder, in our hyper-divided era, how resilient is our political system? How much can any one leader or the system itself really take?